There's a peculiar and often troubling characteristic that many complex systems share. They can appear robust, predictable, and stable for a very long time. And then, with almost no warning, they fail. This explainer looks at the underlying structure that produces this exact pattern. Why does the path to ruin so often look like a long, flat plateau followed by a sudden, steep cliff?
Our intuition about cause and effect tends to be linear. And when we look at how complex systems are built, this seems to hold true. Constructing something complex, whether it's a company, an institution, or an ecosystem, is a gradual process. It requires sustained effort and time to build up layer upon layer of structure and function.
But when these same systems come apart, it rarely follows that same slow path in reverse. Instead, failure often shows up as a rapid, cascading event. This asymmetry, this stark difference between slow creation and fast destruction, presents a fundamental paradox in how systems actually behave.
Now, this observation isn't new. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the Roman philosopher Seneca noted this exact pattern. This phenomenon, often called the Seneca effect, describes that common dynamic where the decline of a system is significantly faster than its period of growth. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the mechanics of stability itself.
So, if we want to understand why systems suddenly collapse, we first need to understand how they stay stable in the first place. A system's ability to persist over time depends entirely on its capacity to maintain a state of equilibrium, which is built from a few key components.
So what do we mean by system stability? Well, it's a state where a system's key functions and outputs remain within a predictable range. It's performing its job consistently, successfully pushing back against the minor, everyday disturbances.
A useful way to visualize this stable state is to picture a ball resting at the bottom of a valley. This location at the bottom represents the system's equilibrium. Sure, small pushes might move the ball up the sides, but the very shape of the valley naturally guides it right back to the center.
That force that pulls the ball back to the center, that's analogous to a system's balancing feedback loops. These are the internal, self-correcting mechanisms that counteract any deviation. Whenever a variable drifts too far from the norm, these loops activate to restore that balance.
In our valley metaphor, resilience is simply the depth of the valley. A deep valley represents a highly resilient system. It can absorb a powerful shock and still return to its stable state. A shallow valley, on the other hand, represents a system with low resilience.
And this brings us to a crucial point. The suddenness of a collapse is often an illusion. It's an illusion created by focusing only on the system's output. The actual process of failure begins much earlier, with the gradual and often invisible erosion of resilience.
You see, no system exists in a vacuum. They are all subject to continuous external pressures, things like resource scarcity, environmental shifts, or increasing operational demands. These pressures act as a constant stress on the system's structure.
And here is the critical insight. These pressures don't directly threaten the system's current performance. Instead, they attack its ability to maintain that performance. They slowly erode those balancing feedback loops, making them weaker and less able to correct for future problems.
Let's see how this plays out. Initially, the system has high resilience. The valley is deep and the feedback loops are strong. It can easily manage both internal fluctuations and external shocks. But as external pressures persist, the system's resilience starts to erode. The balancing feedbacks weaken, and the valley becomes shallower. The system's capacity to absorb a shock has diminished, and yet the ball remains in the exact same position.
Over time, this erosion can become severe. The valley is now extremely shallow, offering very little resistance to disturbances. But notice the crucial detail. The ball, which represents the system's state, has not moved at all.
This is the core of the paradox. An observer who's focused on output would see no problem whatsoever. Performance is stable, key metrics are unchanged. But this stability is deceptive. The system's underlying capacity to maintain it, its resilience, has nearly vanished. Its internal fragility is completely hidden from view.
When a system's resilience is depleted enough, it becomes vulnerable to a phase transition, which is a point where the stable state itself just disappears.
A tipping point is reached when those weakened feedback loops can no longer sustain the system's equilibrium. It's the boundary, the point of no return, beyond which the original stable state is no longer a possible outcome.
At the tipping point, our valley flattens out into a plane. The basin of attraction that once held the system in a stable state is now gone. There's no longer a bottom for the ball to return to.
Now, even a minor routine disturbance, one that the system would have easily absorbed before, is enough to push it onto a new trajectory. This transition is rapid and often self-reinforcing, as other feedback loops take over and drive the system toward a completely different state.
And this explains the disparity between our expectation and reality. We often assume failure will be a mirror image of growth, a slow, linear decline. But the mechanism of eroding resilience produces a non-linear path, a long period of apparent health followed by an abrupt and irreversible collapse.
This model of collapse forces us to reconsider what failure truly represents. It's not an anomaly or an accident. It's an emergent property of complex systems that are simply operating under pressure.
The Seneca cliff, therefore, isn't the beginning of failure. It is only the final visible stage of a much longer, slower process.
And that process is the gradual hidden degradation of the system's resilience. The collapse itself is simply the moment that hidden internal fragility finally intersects with external reality.
This reveals a fundamental principle of complex systems. Performance and resilience are not the same thing. Measuring a system's output only tells you its current state. It reveals nothing about its capacity to remain in that state. A system can appear to be performing optimally, even as its ability to handle future disturbances is silently eroding to zero.